This is On Nutrition, a podcast from Mayo Clinic where we dig into the latest nutrition trends and research to help you understand what's health and what's hype. I'm Tara Schmidt, a registered dietitian with Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. This episode, seed oils. Why are they all over my TikTok? Are they really as bad as the influencers say? And am I supposed to be using them in cooking or not? We'll get into that with our guest today, Dr. Jessie Burns. Jessie is a clinical scientist, research consultant, and medical writer in Ottawa, Canada. She completed her dissertation on the fatty acids in seed oils, so she's a great authority for this trending topic. Hi, Jessie. Thanks for being here today.
Hi, Tara. I'm so excited to be here.
Okay, before we begin, let's get this out of the way. I don't even think I heard the term seed oils in all of my education. You have like a PhD in this stuff. Were people using the term seed oils before TikTok?
No.
Okay, thank you. I'm not crazy.
No. And same as you, when I started to hear this term seed oils coming up, I was like, they can't be talking about canola oil and vegetable oil and all of those typical oils that we cook with. And then getting into the part where people are talking about how they're bad for you, they're toxic for you, all of these claims. We'll get into that in a bit, but what are seed oils? They're just plant-based edible oils that we cook with, that are ingredients that are extracted from, as the name implies, the seeds of certain plants.
What are the most common ones that you think people have in their pantry?
So if we're going into somebody's pantry or in the grocery store, I suspect the most common ones that we're going to see are canola oil, safflower oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil is another common one, and then just general vegetable oil, which is primarily composed of seed oils.
What about lesser known ones? Is chia seed oil really a thing?
So the lesser known ones are like the chia seed oil, flaxseed oil, walnut oil, apparently as well. I don't think we see them as often because they're not as cooking friendly. So they may have sort of a stronger flavor or a lower smoke point, which makes them difficult to actually cook with and use in our day-to-day.
I have had walnut oil before because I was gifted walnut oil. I was like, oh, okay, I can do this. What is not a seed oil?
So in the context of edible oils, we're talking about oils that we eat or we cook with or our ingredients and things. The most common oils that we use that aren't seed oils would be olive oil, coconut oil, avocado oil, palm oil is another one. I think those are the ones that people would be most familiar with.
When people talk about seed oils, where do you think we're typically getting them from?
So that's kind of a key point when we're talking about seed oils that I think often people miss is the context of the foods that we're consuming seed oils in. So where people are primarily getting their seed oils are those ultra-processed foods, fried foods from fast food chains or restaurants. The seed oils that we're actually cooking with at home or using on a day-to-day basis often make up a very small amount of the seed oils in the actual whole diet.
I personally, and you can convince me otherwise, I don't personally think someone cooking their Brussels sprouts, let's say, with canola oil is the issue. I think it's the fast food and the fried foods and the ultra-processed foods, which have, yes, that ingredient, but also a load of other ingredients that I don't love. That's my bigger beef.
Yes, exactly. We're demonizing a single ingredient in the context of a quote-unquote unhealthy food.
Yes.
We know that long-term and when consumed in excess, that ultra-processed foods are detrimental to our health. So when we're talking about seed oils being detrimental to our health, exactly like you said, I'm not concerned about Brussels sprouts that are being roasted in canola oil. If that's how you're going to eat your Brussels sprouts, fantastic. I'm talking about the loads of vegetable oil in a very popular prepackaged snack.
Exactly. And again, it's not just the canola oil that we have an issue with. It's that product as a whole and the nutrition label of that product, which we go line by line through.
Yes, we're looking at the sodium, the lack of fiber, the lack of micronutrients, the sugar. There's so many other factors at play that we need to consider aside from just the canola oil or the vegetable oil in the ingredient list.
So we know that there, especially recently, has been a lot of talk of seed oils online.
What do you think people are really worried about? Where did this bad rap come from?
So there are a couple of components here. I think where this kind of primarily came from was us as scientists not doing a great job at disseminating information to the public. And when that happens, people read the science, but don't have the tools to necessarily interpret it accurately. You're a registered dietitian. As you know, nutrition especially is so nuanced. We can't look at things as individual nutrients, individual ingredients, and we can't look at them in silos. We have to look across the whole diet. So if somebody is reading a research study where, say, they fed mice a high omega-6 diet, and omega-6s are high in seed oils. And if somebody's reading this study where they fed mice a high omega-6 diet in the form of vegetable oil and found that it increased one inflammatory biomarker, there's a lot of room for misinterpretation there, running with it, and then painting all omega-6s or omega-6 containing foods with one brush, where we say omega-6s cause inflammation, when really we know it's deeper than that, it's more nuanced. So there's the kind of misinterpretation of the scientific literature and kind of taking a tiny piece of it and zeroing in on it because people really like sensationalized things when it comes to nutrition. They really like all or nothing. They really like this is bad and this is good. But often that's not the case. The other component with seed oils that I think came up for people is when looking at the processing of seed oils, so the extraction of the oils from the seeds. When looking at that, seeing the solvents is what we call some of the ingredients that are used to pull the oils out of the seeds and refine them. So that's how the oil gets out of the seeds and into that nice yellow liquid that we buy from the store. One of the solvents used is called hexane. And I think when people hear that, they think, oh, there's hexane in my food. When in actuality, the amount of hexane that ends up in the seed oil is very, very small. And further, once you cook with the seed oil, hexane has a very low boiling point. It boils at a very low temperature, and it means it evaporates at that temperature. So when we cook something, as long as it comes, I think it's above 70 degrees Fahrenheit or something along those lines, the hexane is evaporating and essentially disappearing from the oil itself. So it takes that very, very small amount of hexane that was in it to begin with, and then it becomes absolutely negligible after the cooking process. However, it's still kind of scary for people when they hear that there's hexane in the extraction process.
I feel like we can't expect the public to understand these very complex processes of food processing. I don't want to understand them because I don't think I have to per se, because I have people like you to teach me. But I feel like people are making really large leaps without understanding the detail. And again, should they have to understand the detail? No. But that's where like this missing piece of the bridge is. Like, how do we help people truly understand? And if we think about it, no one really wants to listen to us because it's boring. It's so much more exciting for people like, there's hexane in your food. That's toxic. You're going to be inflamed. And like, those are all very scary words.
They are scary. It all sounds scary. And I think a lot of the talk around the toxicity around seed oils, what it all comes back to is fear. People are drawn to, like I said before, sensationalized claims. It goes down to basics with nutrition every time we get back to a healthy diet. Moderation, variety, balance, all of those kind of key components.
Completely agree. Now, I don't want to make anyone feel bad for being concerned, especially because they're caring about what they're putting in their body, and that should be celebrated. We've talked about how some people say seed oils are harmful, and they're usually talking about seed oils as one part of a larger package of unhealthy, ultra-processed foods, essentially giving them more weight than they're due. But is there also truth to the idea that seed oils, just by themselves, might be harmful to us? And if so, at what point in time do they become harmful?
So I think when we're talking about the potential harm of seed oils, we're talking about consuming them in excess. And that's often the case with any topic in nutrition. The dose makes the poison. Water can be toxic if you have too much of it. And so seed oils, when consumed in excess, when you're consuming those omega-6 fatty acids in excess and not balancing them out with other types of fats across your whole diet, that's where they may be harmful. And this is also in the context of over-consuming fat across your whole diet. So if you're going out there and start taking seed oil shots to start your day, don't do that. We don't want that. And then the other component, when they're consuming large amounts of those ultra-processed foods that we know are high in these types of oils, and also high in these other types of nutrients that can be harmful when consumed in excess, that's where we run into the real problems.
Do you think that seed oils are often used in ultra-processed foods because we have a lot of them? They, generally speaking, have a reasonable smoke point, and they're cheap for companies to make huge amounts of food?
Absolutely. I think cost plays a huge role. I also think that when used in the context of these ultra-processed foods, when we add all the sodium or the sugar, I think they also make them highly, highly palatable, which make them really tasty.
Fat tastes good, everyone.
It's amazing.
Now, we've talked about the perceived cons of seed oil. What are the benefits? Are there any?
So seed oils are high in something called unsaturated fats. So that includes the omega-6s that we've mentioned repeatedly. It includes something called monounsaturated fatty acids, and it also includes omega-3 fatty acids. The evidence, and by evidence I mean the scientific literature that's been done and the research that's been done over the past 30 plus years, we overwhelmingly see that when we replace saturated fat in our diet, so saturated fat can come from things like butter, it can come from things like lard, it can come from things like beef tallow, which I'm seeing a lot about online. When we replace the saturated fats with those unsaturated fats, we undoubtedly, consistently, across the scientific literature, across decades of research, we see health benefits. We see reduction in risk for chronic disease, things like heart disease, certain types of cancers, metabolic conditions like type 2 diabetes. And I think when we're talking about this, I think it's also important to note that by replacing saturated fats with unsaturated fats, you're not completely eliminating your risk for any of these conditions. We're just moving the needle a little bit to decrease the risk of developing them and improving your overall whole health.
And I love that you bring up replacement, because I think that that is something that I've been preaching, hopefully successfully, for many years, ever since we kind of knew that that was the word that was missing, probably in the 90s, right? Because they accidentally said eat less fat, where they should have said replace saturated fats and trans fats, eliminate those, with unsaturated fats. And it really confused people for a long, long time. So we're not going to either end of the spectrum. We're not talking about a high-fat diet. We're not talking about a low-fat diet. We're talking about getting the right distribution of macronutrients. And when we look at the fat as a macronutrient, most of it should be unsaturated. And that can include seed oil. Yes?
Yes. And I think another piece of the puzzle is people are often drawn to extremes. So like you mentioned in the 90s, it became, we need to eat zero fat. But we know our bodies need fat. Our cells need fat. Our blood needs fat. All of our organs need fat in order to function. So we're not eliminating fat.
Yes.
And it's important to note that we're also not adding extra fat into the diet in the name of health. We're simply replacing the saturated fat where it's already there with the unsaturated fat with options like seed oils. This can also be options like the non-seed oils that I mentioned earlier. It can be the olive oils, avocado oil, other options as well.
It's Kelly Clarkson here to talk all things Wayfair, the best place to buy furniture, decor, and anything else you can think of to create a home you absolutely love. I know when I shop with Wayfair, I find options for every style, whether I'm feeling boho or farmhouse, modern, traditional, French country. I can find exactly what I need for my home and more. No matter your space, style, or budget, shop Wayfair.com to make your home way more you.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Your business is one of a kind.
so your website should be too. With Wix, it's easy, almost too easy, to create a website that's perfectly yours. Just tell AI what kind of site you want to build or choose from thousands of templates. Change whatever you want whenever you want and get everything you need to start running your business your way. No matter what you sell or what you aspire to be, you can do it all yourself on Wix. Go to Wix.com.
Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic.
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
To recap, seed oils are plant-based oils that we cook with, extracted from the seeds of certain plants. They include oils like canola oil, safflower oil, and soybean oil. But are seed oils healthy or not? Well, long story short, it all comes down to how much you consume. The amount we use at home makes up a very small portion of our whole diet. And it isn't really something you need to worry about, especially if you're generally eating healthfully. What's more concerning is the amount of seed oils in ultra-processed food, along with all the other ingredients you'll find in them. And if consumed in excess, that can be a problem. In addition to eating in moderation, we also want to make sure to balance our intake of seed oils with other types of fats. That said, seed oils may also have some benefits, like when you use them to replace saturated fats. Next, we'll talk more about unsaturated fats and the difference between omega-6s and omega-3s. So when we talk about unsaturated fats as a group, we have monounsaturated fats, which are the healthy fats we know of, olive oil, avocados, and nuts. And then there's polyunsaturated fats, which we can break down further into omega-6s and omega-3s. So I want to make sure folks understand the difference between omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. Can you explain what those are and where we usually find them?
Yes. If we're talking about oils, we're talking about unsaturated fatty acids, we're talking about omega-6s, omega-3s, and those monounsaturated fatty acids, but there are distinctions between all 3 of them. The omega-6s are the ones that we're primarily going to find in the seed oils that we're cooking with. They're going to make up the bulk of the lipid content in a lot of those oils, and they're found in both plant sources and animal sources. So in the seed oils, those are going to be our plant-based sources of omega-6s, and then in animal sources, we'll find them in things like animal meats, some dairy products, and those sorts of options. The omega-3s, however, are a little bit more nuanced. So we'll find them in oils. The less common oils that we talked about, the chia seed oil, the flaxseed oil, the walnut oil, we'll find a higher omega-3 content in those oils, but they're less often used because they have a lower smoke point, which makes them difficult to cook with. There's also the animal-based sources of omega-3s. So where we find those are primarily in fish and seafood. We can also find them for individuals who follow a plant-based diet. EPA and DHA are the primary ones that we see in our diet, basically what the fish eat, algae and seaweed as well. In the context of our health, we know that the omega-3s have very high health benefits to incorporating them into our diet. And when we're talking about omega-3s and omega-6s, it's important to consider that one is not necessarily worse or better than the other. We know that there are huge health benefits with the omega-3s, but that doesn't mean that the omega-6s are bad.
Sure. Both things can be true.
2 things can be true. Yes. One thing to consider, though, is if you're consuming primarily omega-6s in your diets, the types of oils, the types of fats that you're eating, we also want to focus on adding in some of those omega-3s. There's a lot of talk about the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio.
Yes.
And in North America, our omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is extremely skewed. Our intake of omega-6 fatty acids is substantially higher than that of omega-3s.
So you're talking about the food that we're eating. In America, we're eating a lot more omega-6s than omega-3s. Can I draw the conclusion, because we're eating a lot of ultra-processed foods and not a lot of fish? Is that too simple?
No, that's not too simple. That is primarily where it's coming from, is our omega-6 intake. A lot of it is coming from the ultra-processed foods. And then the omega-3 intake is we are not eating nearly enough fish and seafood. We know that it's recommended to eat 2 to 3 servings of fish per week, at least 2 servings of fish per week, in order to meet the minimum requirements for animal-based omega-3 fatty acids. So those EPA and DHA fatty acids that I mentioned earlier. In reality, most people are consuming less than 1 serving per week, so less than half of the recommendation. And I think the stat is somewhere around 80% of people aren't consuming any fish or seafood on a regular basis, which is concerning when we think about the benefits of animal-based omega-3s for things like heart health, chronic disease risk reduction, and all of the health benefits.
And I know that people are not missing out on their fish because they're all vegan, because I've seen the graph of how in excess, especially adults, I'm just going to say it's adult males. That's the graph. That's the scariest. It's a real graph, I swear. It's in the dietary guidelines for Americans, are eating a ton of red meat. So if you are a vegan, or if you do not consume fish for whatever reason, we can help you get those omega-3s in other ways. But what would benefit the majority of the population is to replace, again, we're not taking anything away from you, we're replacing your red meat, let's say twice a week, with fish and or seafood.
Yes, exactly. It's about replacing. And like you said, we're not taking anything away from you. We're not saying you can't have your red meat. But what if we made a change 1 or 2 days a week?
What if your tacos became fish tacos or shrimp tacos?
Shrimp tacos are delicious.
And I ask you because you did your dissertation a while back on omega-6s and omega-3s. How did your initial hypothesis change the more that you did your research?
This is such a fun question. So my dissertation was on the role of dietary omega-3s and omega-6s in causing inflammation in the context of potentially increasing risk for chronic diseases. So back to those common chronic conditions like cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and certain types of cancers. And at the start of my graduate studies, before I really dived into things, I was sure that I was going to find that omega-6s, so again, the common fatty acid found in seed oils, was going to have a pro-inflammatory effect. What I found when I conducted my own scientific research in a lab, conducting well-designed studies, and diving into the previous literature, we call it the body of evidence around this topic, was overwhelmingly, even consuming omega-6s in very high quantities did not induce inflammation or induce any of the markers that we looked at for inflammation in our models. So I want to be really clear that the primary research that I did was primarily in rodent models, so in mouse models. We can't extrapolate that data to humans, but it is a starting point. But I was certain that we were going to see an effect on inflammation. And I was wrong. And when I really dove into the clinical literature and research around this, so we're talking about the studies in human subjects, randomized controlled trials, guidelines, recommendations, systematic reviews, things that are really, really rigorous and kind of the highest quality of evidence. We see the same thing. When we're talking about replacing saturated fats in the diet with things like seed oils, omega-6s, those things that have been now labeled as pro-inflammatory, we see health benefits and we don't see increased risk of inflammation.
I do want to be clear, and I want to make sure that I've got it right. You are saying that you did not find that omega-6s were inherently, let's just say bad, right, in causing inflammation. However, we're not going to replace the word omega-6s with high omega-6 ultra-processed foods, because then that would not be correct anymore.
Yes.
Like, this is not a pro ultra-processed foods discussion. But again, both things can be true, right? When we look at omega-6s as a nutrient, they might not be as detrimental like what you once thought. And ultra-processed foods, which tend to have high amounts of omega-6s, are still not beneficial for us.
Yes. In my research studies for my PhD that we were talking about, we were looking at omega-6s in isolation. And we've said a few times over the course of this episode, we don't eat ingredients, we don't eat nutrients.
You can't do that.
It's not representative of our whole diet. But when you're taking omega-6s and putting them in the context of those ultra-processed foods, like we mentioned, that are higher in sodium, sugar, other types of fats, lower in micronutrients, almost negligible fiber content, there's a bigger picture at play there.
Are all seed oils created equal, or is there like a hierarchy of health between the types?
This is a really good question, and it sounds like a cop-out, but it's nuanced. It's super nuanced. Everything in nutrition is nuanced. And I think there's a lot of factors at play aside from just the fatty acid or the nutrient composition of the seed oils. So in a perfect world, we could go for seed oils that had a higher omega-3 content than omega-6 content when we go back to that ratio that we talked about. However, seed oils that are higher in omega-3s often aren't practical for cooking because of that low smoke point that they have. They burn really easily, and it's just not practical for cooking a stir fry, for instance. The other components are things like cost. So cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil, not a seed oil, but kind of one of those ones that's kind of put on a pedestal for health, is really expensive. Whereas sunflower oil or mixed vegetable oil are often not nearly as expensive. So it's a bigger conversation about accessibility. And when we're talking about the oils that you're cooking with in your home, I wouldn't be as concerned about what type you're using or saying one is better than the other. If these oils are going to get you cooking at home and preparing your meals at home, there's a lot of other benefits there as well. The other factor is I can't go out there and say, only cook with this oil. Because we need a variety of different types of fatty acids that are found in different types of oils. So in my house, for instance, I'm going to marinate my chicken breast in a combination of olive oil and lemon juice because I like how it tastes. I like how it cooks. I think it works really well. Whereas if I'm baking muffins, maybe I'm using canola oil instead because I don't want to use olive oil in my muffins because I don't like the flavor. So there's cost to consider. There's trying to get a variety of fatty acids, which happens when you use different types of oils. And there's that accessibility piece.
And cultural implications too. And again, favorite recipes and smoke point, like you said. Like if using those kinds of oils is what you're using because it's in your pantry, because you're cooking at home, then you get a gold star, and we don't have to talk anymore about seed oils.
Agreed.
Let's review the differences between omega-6s and omega-3s. Omega-6s come from seed oils, animal proteins, and dairy. We find omega-3s in less common oils like chia seed oil and flaxseed oil. They're also in seafood and even seaweed. Research tells us there are health benefits to incorporating omega-3s into our diets. But that doesn't mean that omega-6s are inherently bad for you or that you need to avoid them. What's more important is the source. Where are you getting them from? On average, most of us eat more omega-6s than omega-3s, but we do need both. Many people are currently getting their omega-6s from ultra-processed foods, so an ideal solution would be to cut back on ultra-processed snacks and consider replacing red meat with fish for a couple of meals per week. Next, we'll talk more about how to choose from the many oils you'll find in the grocery store.
It can be a little bit overwhelming at the grocery store to see over a dozen kinds of oil. So let's get into the details consumers should know the next time they go shopping. Let's differentiate between refined and unrefined on an oil label. Is one healthier or better than the other?
I think in the context of preparing your own foods at home, unless you're doing a lot of deep frying at home, the difference between the refined and the unrefined isn't going to make a huge difference in your overall health. The unrefined oils are the things like the cold pressed olive oils. So, because they're not heated to high temperatures and they're extracted differently, they retain some of their vitamin content and their antioxidant content. So, it makes them a little bit better in some ways because they have those beneficial nutrients in them still. Whereas the refined oils are the seed oils that we've talked about. And we talked about the oil extraction process when we were talking about hexane earlier. There's also a heating process involved in the extraction, and this can reduce or eliminate the vitamins and the antioxidants that are naturally found in the oils. So there are some kind of marginal differences in the nutrient composition of the refined versus the unrefined oils. However, there are lots of other ways for you to be getting those antioxidants and those vitamins in your diet, especially if it means, like we keep coming back to, if you're cooking at home more and you're eating the Brussels sprouts.
I should have picked a better tasting vegetable. What about the term high oleic, which we might see on sunflower or soybean oil labels? What does that mean?
So high oleic is just calling back to another one of those types of fatty acids that we've been talking about. So we've been talking about as a whole, the unsaturated fatty acids, the omega-6s, the omega-3s, and the monounsaturated fatty acids. Oleic acid is just another one of those types of fatty acids, referring to the monounsaturated fatty acids. There was a trend where people were really, really convinced that monounsaturated fatty acids were amazing for your health for a while. In the context of the actual scientific evidence that we have, the jury is still a little bit out. So we have a lot of evidence for the omega-3s, the omega-6s, less evidence for the monounsaturated fatty acids. Building on that point a little bit, I think when we're talking about nutrition as a whole, people get confused and maybe a little bit frustrated with the back and forth. As we try to learn more about nutrition and nutrients, people don't realize that nutrition science is a really new science. Lots of things have been studied for a really, really long time. Nutrition science was a new field of study starting in the 1900s. So we are learning a lot. And especially now in 2025 with accessibility, technology, we're learning really quickly. And as we learn more, we do better with the information that we have.
And we share it. We're trying to share it. We're trying, you guys, but TikTok is taking over.
We're trying. And I also want to be clear that everything that we're saying right now is what we know at this point in time.
As of right now. Yeah.
Subject to change. We're evolving.
And science evolving is not a bad thing. Is it an annoying thing? Sure it is, and I get it. And I think the media makes that even more dramatized, right? You're like, you told me fat was bad. Now you're telling me fat is good, right? But us learning about nutrition and expanding the life expectancy, like, we don't want to just stop doing research on cancer. No, we're going to keep doing that until we figure that sucker out. We're doing our best, everyone, to get you the right information. That's why we're here.
And we're trying to give the people the tools to know better so that they can take it into their lives to do better.
We also have to talk with seed oils about smoke point and flavor profile. Just like you said, not everyone wants to have an olive oil flavored pancake, let alone my kids. If you're going to be stir frying, we don't want our kitchen to be like a black cloud of smoke. We have to talk about price point. So I don't think it necessarily has a bearing on how healthy a seed oil may be, but I would say the closer we can get to a singular food, like this is a cold press olive oil, I would make a case for that. Would you do the same if we compare something like olive oil or avocado oil to, quote, vegetable oil?
That's a good point. We're not talking about this saying everybody should be eating seed oils and only seed oils. I just really wanted to make it super duper clear that we're not saying seed oils are a health promoting food. We're saying we don't have to be afraid of them. in a moderate balanced diet.
Yes.
Everybody has their favorite oils. And in my house, for instance, I'm not going to prioritize using seed oils every single day. It comes back to that variety.
And what I would ask a patient in my office, and especially, let's say, in cardiology, where this is even more pronounced, I don't say like, hey, do you sometimes make pancakes on the weekend? What kind of oil is that? Or like, do you occasionally make muffins? What do you do for that? I really don't care. I'm asking them, what is the oil you use most often? Because that's the question that I only really need an answer to. And then I move on and we stop talking about it unless they have questions. But you can have a whole host of these things.
Most often, and what does the rest of your diet look like?
Yes.
Are you eating a whole bunch of prepackaged chips or snacks or baked goods, those ultra-processed foods that are really high in seed oils? We have to keep the whole diet in mind. We're not demonizing a specific ingredient, and we're focusing on variety and balance. There's a place for all of those types of fatty acids in our diets. The omega-6s, the omega-3s, the monounsaturated fatty acids, the olive oil versus the canola oil or the soybean oil or whatever your preference is.
And I think in this conversation, we're not talking about adding a seed oil because that sounds funny for me to say. I think we're talking about eating more at home or cooking more at home, which may result in you cooking with seed oils, but I'm also significantly decreasing likely the amount that you're consuming by limiting your intake of ultra-processed foods.
That's perfectly said.
That's our takeaway. And I don't want to yuck anyone's yum. So if you are someone who you're not going to have X and Y and Z, and we're not going to have any ultra-processed foods, and we're not going to have any seed oils, I can be okay with that, right? Like if you have an extremely plant-forward whole foods diet, I'm not going to go tell you to eat seed oils, right? But also it's my job to talk to the majority of the population. So you and I, right, when we're having this conversation today, are not talking to the person who has elected to have an extremely, quote, clean diet with only whole foods, only plants, and only animals that graze the grass in their backyard. If you are doing that, power to you. In all seriousness, that is fabulous.
Go for it. That's fantastic. The problem is that's not accessible to the majority of the population. That's not accessible to the working parent with 4 kids who needs to get dinner on the table 15 minutes ago.
And I'm going to say the majority of America is struggling with their intake of seed oils from ultra-processed foods.
Yes, we need to find a way to live with convenience foods, which are often the ultra-processed foods, and find a way to prepare foods for our family like the Brussels sprouts or broccoli or roasted asparagus. But if that's what makes preparing meals for your family accessible, or if that's what makes eating vegetables accessible for you, or if you will only enjoy a salad if it has a dressing made with canola oil, then that's a fantastic option.
Completely agree. Jessie, thank you for bringing all of your PhD knowledge to On Nutrition today. You are an absolute pleasure to have, and I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tara. It was so much fun.
Nutrition science is still relatively new, so you might find that dietary advice you've gotten in the past no longer applies. But the evolution of this science is something that ultimately indicates progress. When it comes to how we look at seed oils, don't think of them as a health-promoting food, but rather something we don't have to be afraid of. Because of their accessibility and cost, foods with seed oils can be convenient, especially when it comes to preparing meals at home. And that's okay. Think in broader strokes about the patterns in your diet. Where do you get most of your seed oils from? Cooking at home, eating out, or ultra-processed foods? Use those questions to help you consider how you may change your diet. And remember, everything in moderation. That's all for this episode. But if you have a follow-up question, leave us a voicemail at 507-538-6272, and we might answer it in a future episode. On the next episode of On Nutrition, support systems.
Like whatever goal weight you express to somebody, Half the people it's going to be too low, half the people it's going to be too high. Maybe 1 in a million is going to say, oh, that makes perfect sense to me. How can I support you?
For more On Nutrition episodes and resources, check us out online at mayoclinic.org/onnutrition. And if you found this show helpful, please subscribe and make sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. It really helps others find our show. Thanks for listening. And until next time, eat well and be well.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as medical or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare provider for any medical questions. The appearance of any guest does not imply an endorsement of them, their employer, or any entity they represent. The views and opinions are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of Mayo Clinic. Reference to any product, service, or entity does not constitute an endorsement of or recommendation by Mayo Clinic.
What does it mean to move at the speed of AI? It means thinking big and moving fast. It means running like a 10-person team, even if it's just you. With Wix, it's possible. Create a website that's as unique as your business. Launch a new campaign or test new ways to make more money without slowing down. Think it, build it, scale it, all with AI on Wix.